Good morning, distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen. I am Suryana Sabri from the Center for Academic Development, CADe, UPM. It is my great pleasure to introduce our first keynote speaker for IUCEL2022. Our speaker this morning is a prominent professor in learning technologies and innovation. He is a chair professor and an associate dean of international engagement at the Education University of Hong Kong and a visiting professor at the UNESCO Center for Higher Education Innovations and Tsinghua University. Before joining the Education University of Hong Kong, in 2010, he was a professor of education, a director of international partnerships, and director of the Asia Pacific Center of Excellence for Teacher Education and Innovations in Western Australia. The last 2 decades had witnessed his continuous engagements with many major education stakeholders at the national and international levels, including UNESCO, Asian Development Bank, Microsoft, World Bank, CMIO, Putra, Sampurna Foundation, and government agencies, to name a few. Currently, he is the editor-in-chief of the Internet and Higher Education, a journal that is ranked #1 in e-learning for the last 6 years. It is indeed an honor to have him here with us today to share his thoughts about teaching and learning innovations in higher education. Please welcome Professor Dr. Lim Cher Ping.
Thank you so much, Dr. Suraina. Yeah, like it was quite great to be able to chat with you just before the main session itself. Yeah, it is actually indeed a great honor to be involved in the International University kind of e-learning of the UPM. It is quite tough that we could not be there in the physical space where we could actually interact. But I think but of course, the virtual space actually allows us to be able to interact cross borders without being there physically. You know, it's like, just for example, the Dr. Zuhaini, you know, it's like, who is based in Amsterdam now at a really weird time and still being able to keep your eyes open and make such a wonderful presentation, right? So it actually affords us that, right? Thing is, as what I have told Dr. Suraina, you know, it's like I have been to the UPM a couple of times. It is a huge campus, and it is definitely one of the universities in the Southeast Asian region that is doing quite a lot of innovative stuff in terms of teaching and learning, and also in terms of research development and knowledge transfer, right? I would say that as far as I know, the UPM has signed a MOU with the center which I'm a visiting professor in, right? The UNESCO ICHI, right? To serve as the IIOE National Center in Malaysia, and also to be contributing to trying to enhance the equity, quality, and efficiency of the higher education sector in Southeast Asia and in Asia, right? So, so it is indeed a great pleasure to be able to be involved in a university like UPM. Right, so I'm going to start to share my screen now. And you should be able to take a look at it right now. Right, this is what I would be talking through for the rest of the morning, and hopefully I should be able to complete it within 40 to 45 minutes or so. Teaching and learning innovations in higher education. I think quite a bit of the background that I would be sharing with you, the previous speaker have actually provided us quite a comprehensive elaboration of the issues and challenges that the higher education sector is facing, right? think if we just draw upon the McKinsey report pre-pandemic, right, there is this prediction that by 2030, the artificial intelligence would actually replace 800 million jobs, right? And the thing is, of course, quite often these jobs that we are talking about are quite low value jobs, right? In terms of the value addedness, right, of the production process, right? And the thing is, if we are looking at a prediction like this, it is quite clear that human capital is the greatest asset of any country, right? And human capital development through higher education become an important driving force, right? So we need to keep in mind that human capital development, right, is something that higher education institutions need to be more pragmatic about, right? Just like UPM, I think the Education University of Hong Kong, and a lot of universities in Asia and all around the world, we have been actually focusing a lot on research and development and knowledge transfer, right? Those are key focal areas that need to be worked on. But I think is at the same time we need to be really upfront that teaching and learning, student learning engagement, and student learning outcomes are the bread and butter of a university. And in terms of human capital development, we in higher education institutions, I think we need to be more pragmatic and be more committed in ensuring that we are developing the human capital within our country and across countries. Right? So, which means that we need to be pragmatic, as what I said. Like not just in terms of trying to provide qualified manpower for employment, right? But it's also about the enhancement of the quality of life of our students and of our graduates, right? Through the development of 21st century competencies and development. The pandemic have actually like highlighted quite a number of things with respect to how certain jobs have become redundant and how certain jobs have been created, right? And how certain tasks within jobs have changed, right? And of course, that requires the graduates that we produce to be lifelong learners, to be always learning for life, to be able to unlearn and relearn, right? To be able to pick up a new set of competencies that they are able to carry out, say, within their job or in a new job. Right. And the thing is, we also need to recognize that as the economy is developing, right, and as we try to address the equity issue within our country and across countries, economies need to move away from that reliance on low skilled, low wage, and low value added industries, right, and try to be able to address that through the transformation of the higher education sector, right? So to be addressing the issue and the tensions of quality and equity, right? Something that the previous speaker have been mentioning about, right? So when we look at the expected learning outcomes, right? As what I said, it's not just preparing for the industry and preparing to be a professional, right? But to be equipped with a set of 21st century competencies that have been quite often mentioned again and again pre-pandemic, from critical thinking, creative thinking, right through to ethical decision making, effective communication, and of course, one of the key things that the pandemic have highlighted, right, the learning for life competencies. Right, so we in the education sector, right, in the higher education sector, we need to keep in mind that what we are really looking at through the quality enhancement and quality assurance process that we had over the decades, right, that we want to be able to achieve quality, right, to be able to engage our students and to be able to ensure that they are able to meet up with the expected learning outcomes of our programs, of our courses, and of course, the graduate attributes that the universities that they are in, right, that they are able to meet up with those graduate attributes as well, right? But I think it's at the same time, as we try to move towards quality, we want to be able to address that equity issue. I think the previous speaker had really highlighted that, right? Like, how do we ensure inclusiveness, right? How do we actually reach out to the students from the, let's say, rural and remote area, right? So if we are looking at the Malaysia itself, how do we ensure that our city universities, right, or the provincial universities, those in the more rural areas in Malaysia, right, are of the same quality as that in the city, right? But I think is equity also means being able to support different types of students, a diverse group of students, right? The students with special needs, the students from low social economic groups, right, within our country. The say the gender equity issue, right? Not just female and male per se, right, but across the whole spectrum. How do we ensure that our students from marginalized groups, right, have actually are being included in that quality higher education, right? And I think if you look at the last triangle, the efficiency triangle, right, we want to be able to ensure external efficiency, to be able to be able to develop competencies of our students, right, to be able to operate effectively within the workforce and within the society, right, which is external efficiency. And also the internal efficiency of cost effectiveness, right? Like given unlimited ones, trying to achieve equity and quality at the same time. How could we ensure that we are able to do that in a more cost-effective way? Right, so this presentation itself, right, basically would focus on how universities and the higher education sector could drive and support technology-enabled teaching and learning innovations, right? Because there is basically all kinds of teaching and learning innovations in terms of curriculum reform, in terms of assessment reforms. I think for this particular presentation, I'll just be focusing on technology-enabled teaching and learning innovations and how that is able to address equity, quality, and efficiency, something that I've showed you in the previous slide, right, and manage the transformation in the higher education sector post-pandemic, right? So previous speaker have highlighted SDG for inclusive and equitable quality higher education and lifelong learning for all. Right, so just to probably quickly give you a background and to be able to highlight that urgency, right, of the impacts of the pandemic and how the pandemic itself have made us rethink quite a lot about higher education, teaching and learning. I would probably say that what we are talking through and what we are thinking through now is not much different from pre-pandemic, but I think the pandemic have highlighted and create that urgency that we need to be engaged in such conversations and to be able to try to look for solutions to be able to address some of these issues and challenges. So if we look at the pandemic, it's not just a health crisis per se, right? But it is definitely a learning crisis, right? And I think from K to 12 schools right through to the universities, right, we could see that it is quite a learning crisis where when you have full closure and partial closure of schools, right, whereby certain groups of students are being denied the access to quality online and remote teaching and learning, right? It may be girls, it may be students from marginalized communities, as I've said, including those with special needs, those from low socioeconomic groups, or those from remote and rural areas, right? When we are looking at the pandemic as at its peak more than 2 years ago, right, across the world, like you have more than 1 billion students that are being affected, right? And that is actually at its peak. Of course, things are getting better now as more and more schools and universities are opening up, just like in EDU Hong Kong and in UPM, right? But I think is we need to be aware of, it's like that learning loss itself, right? It's over a period of like 1 year or at least 1 year, if not 2 years and 2.5 years, right? And if we just look at Southeast Asia, like these are the ASEAN member states, right? You could see that it's actually quite a huge number of students that are being affected, right? If you are looking at Malaysia alone, right? If we are looking at higher education students, right, it is at least between 1.5 to 2 million students that are being affected by that full closure and partial closure, right? And the thing is, it have an impact on equity, quality, and efficiency, right? And it is quite often due to the access to infrastructure, devices, and resources, right? Especially those from remote and rural areas, and also those from low socioeconomic groups, right? Where they may not have access to that infrastructure or they may not have access to those devices, right? And those with special needs as well, right? That they may not be able to use certain devices at home because that they could be using in their schools or in their university that cater to their special needs, right? There is, of course, always the issue of the quality of online teaching and learning because across universities, not just in Malaysia, but all over the world, right? Quite often, the university teachers may not have the competencies to be doing it fully online, right? Whereby they try to replicate whatever they are doing face-to-face online without much changes to the pedagogies, right? So it is something that the center in UPM is really trying to be able to do, right? To be able to build a capacity of the teaching and academic staff in order to be able to engage in technology-enabled teaching and learning, right? And to ensure that you are not just ensuring that they are able to teach online, right? But the quality of it, that it is able to enhance student learning engagement and student learning outcomes. When we are looking at the students, I think we need to keep in mind, it's like we talk about generation X, Y, Z, right? We talk about, like probably two decades or 1 decade ago about digital natives and all, right? But I think it does not mean that students who are making use of technologies in their everyday life, that they know how to learn online, right? Just by observing my daughters, right? It's quite clear that, it's like, although they are really tech savvy, right? They need the learning support. They need to know how to monitor and manage their own learning, not just in terms of the timetabling, but also the learning tasks, right? And it is something that we could not take it for granted. So again, something that the center in UPM is trying to do, not just working with the teachers, but also working with the students and ensuring that the teachers are able to support the students to learn online, right? The modes of assessment have changed. because there is a need for change, right? That you could not just move a paper and pen examination totally online and expect that there is the same validity and reliability, right? And how that would help us rethink about summative assessment and formative assessment, right? And of course, one of the key things and one of the most exciting thing, right, is that um, the pandemic have actually made us rethink about the curriculum, right? How could we better like redesign the curriculum in such a way that is able to make to be able to meet up to the changing demands of the emerging industries, right? And also the future shape of the workforce, right? So, but thing is, as we are trying to address all this, we need to keep in mind all the challenges that we have in UPM, in other universities in Malaysia, in Southeast Asia, in Asia, and all over the world, right? In Asia, quite often you see high student-teacher ratio, right? But across the globe, you see that student population are becoming more and more diverse, right? So again, how do you meet that different needs of the student population to ensure equity is being addressed? There's often a lack of professional development opportunities and support for higher education teachers. As I was talking to the Surayana just now, it's fantastic to hear that she, from one of the faculty, is being attached to the center, right? So that eventually she could be providing support for the faculty as well. But I think most universities do not have that luxury, right, as compared to UPM, right? If you start moving to Cambodia or Laos or Myanmar in ASEAN, you would realize that such opportunities are not as common as in UPM, right? And of course, we know that institutional capacity for quality teaching and learning vary across universities, right? Some of the universities do not even have a quality assurance, quality enhancement mechanisms in place. There may be a mismatch between the curriculum and the labor market. I think something that, as we talk about teaching and learning innovations with technologies, that as long as there is that mismatch, regardless of how you try to beef out technology-enabled teaching and learning, right, it is unlikely that we are able to achieve efficiency within the higher education sector, right? And of course, we need to be always aware of our students from the marginalized group. You know, it might be ethnic minorities, right? In the case of Malaysia, ethnic minorities, especially in East Malaysia, women, people with special needs, and those from remote and rural areas. How do we provide them with the access? And access is not just access to infrastructure, access to devices. It's also access in terms of how do we actually ensure that they have the online learning competencies to be able to engage in quality higher education. Okay, let us move on to technology-enabled learning innovations. I would just browse through or share like with you some of these innovations, providing you with some of the examples, right? How technology-enabled learning innovations could actually try to address that tension between quality, equity, and efficiency. Right, so first would be blended and online learning, 3D printing, AR, VR, learning analytics, learning at scale, artificial intelligence, and digital game-based learning. Right, I'm quite sure that you have heard of all these terms. The center within UPM would probably have experimented and have been working with staff on many of these innovations as well. Right, so I just want to share with you again what are the opportunities that these innovations have for quality, equity, and efficiency, and try to share with you some of the examples. First would be blended and online learning. Of course, when like during the pandemic itself, I would say that quite often in most of the universities, it is totally online, right? But as we move towards post-pandemic, right, I think blended learning will become a norm, right, rather than the exception, right, where we look at the online learning replacing some of the face-to-face learning. Um, like actually uh, actually without increasing the contact hours, right? So you still have the same number of contact hours, right? It might be 39 contact hours for a 3 credits course, right? But the thing is, it will be a blend of, let's say, 30 hours face-to-face and 9 hours online, right? And that 9 hours online could be taught by a university professor from USM in Penang, just for example, right? Or from a professor in Hong Kong in the Education University of Hong Kong, just for example, right? So it's a blend, it's online. Right. I would just actually share with you an example of how in one of the projects that we were working in Cambodia pre-pandemic, how we use blended learning to address the equity issue. Right. So when we were talking to the Director General of Higher Education in Cambodia, one of the key things that he wanted us to do is to try to bridge the gap between rural university, provincial university, and city university, right? In this case, the top university in Cambodia, the Royal University of Phnom Penh. How do we ensure the quality of teaching and learning in some of their courses, right? Is actually on par with the in the provincial university. In this case, we were working with the Swarin University, which is about 2 hours from Phnom Penh, and the National University of Pattabong, which is about 6 hours from Phnom Penh. So how do we ensure that quality of teaching and learning? Right. So we thought of first we want to be developing quality online learning resources. But this quality online learning resources would not be just produced by the Royal University of Phnom Penh, or what we call the RUPP, right? But it would be a co-development that is being led by professors in RUPP with lecturers, right, from SRU and NUBB, right, which are provincial university, right? There's that co-development of quality resources, online resources, right, that could be used across the courses that are being taught in all 3 universities, right? This development itself become also a professional development and trying to build the competencies of the teachers, especially in SRU and NUBB, right? Because quite often those in the city universities, most of the teachers there have a PhD, and most of their PhD is from an overseas university, right? But those in the provincial university, quite a lot of them only have a master's degree, do not have a PhD, and if they have a PhD, is usually from a local university, right? So what is really interesting is we develop the resources online, right? And eventually these resources are being used in each of the courses across all 3 universities in the blended learning way, right? So by having quality online resources, building capacity of the teachers, we hope that we will be able to address that gap between city university and provincial university, right? So this would be an example of blended learning, right? Of course, there will be many examples that the center in your university will be able to share, right? But this is just one example of how it addressed the issue of equity and quality and doing it in a very cost-effective way, right? 3D printing, think it's not to engage in 3D printing for the sake of doing 3D printing or teaching students how to do 3D printing per se, right? But it is to use 3D printing as a way to create objects that could be used in teaching and learning, may it be in higher education and in vocational education. I would share with you examples from the medical and the dentistry schools in the National University of Singapore, right? Whereby you could see that quite often in a school of medicine or faculty of in medicine, right? Trying to gain access to the objects whereby the students can maneuver with, right? Could actually explore, right? Maybe quite tough, right? And 3D printing actually ensure that you could provide that access to all students, not just students working in groups, right? But each students could have an object to be actually working with, right? So you could see in the top part, it's like how in a lot of the like emerging and developing countries, a lot of the faculty of medicine, they just rely on like 2D type of objects on computer screen or on paper, right? And because they can't afford option B, right? But thing is, if 3D printing is available, right, it would actually ensure that option B is more accessible, right, in the form of option C, right? And of course, what you have seen below is a 3D printing of a jaw with the gum and the teeth, right, for the faculty of dentistry, right? So again, it afford that type of the objects, right? Bringing us to AR, VR, right? I'm quite sure that you are quite familiar with this concept. The whole thing about VR trying to bring the outside world, right, into the classroom, right, in terms of virtual reality, and the AR, right, like trying to be able to bring in the like the objects, right, in the space that we have, in the learning space that we have, right, and to be able to situate it maybe in an outside world, and to be able to like maneuver through 3D spaces to create a new experience for these students, right? So again, going back to the dentistry, it's like whereby when you ask a dentistry student to do an injection, to actually administer an LA, right? You can't do it in a live patient. You could probably do it actually on a dummy, but there's just so many dummies that you could that you could provide. And even in the case of a dummy, you might not be able to see what is really happening inside the gum, right, in terms of the nerves, right? But I think is if you're able to use AR together with 3D printing, just like what you see in this picture here, right? It's really quite exciting that you're able to see the internal working of the gums, right? And how the LA injection actually goes into the gum, into the nerve, right? To be able to provide that type of visual representation that may not be possible in a dummy or even using a real life patient, right? So, which is really exciting. Virtual reality. This is actually an example of a group of chemical engineering students working in the lab, right? Think like quite often in a lot of developed countries, like Malaysia, like Brunei, like Singapore, right? Quite often, it's like when chemical engineering students are working on bioreactor, right? They would be using a real life one, a single-use one, right? But the thing is, a single-use bioreactor is really quite expensive, right? It's close to a 5-digit figure in US dollars, right? To be able to use that like a single-use bioreactor. So quite often it is used in quite a big group of students, right? Might be 10, might be 12, and not every student might have that hands-on experience, right? But I think is if you provide virtual reality, just like what you see in the bottom set of pictures, right? Each students with a VR goggles and like certain objects, they could actually be exploring the bioreactor virtually, and each student would be able to have that hands-on experience with that bioreactor, and therefore you are able to not just achieve quality and equity, but you are able to achieve that cost effectiveness as well. Okay, next one would be learning at scale. I think like something that Malaysian universities have been doing really well in terms of massive open online courses, credit transfers, ensuring that the public universities across Malaysia, right, you could have students taking, UPM students could be doing courses in UTM, UKM or USM or any public universities in the Malaysia virtually, and yet being able to get the credits, right? So the learning at scale thing is really quite exciting in the sense that it is able to achieve that scale in terms of addressing equity and hopefully providing that quality, right? So if you have a top biotech like professor in UPM, right? But you do not have that much capacity in USM in Penang, for example. Rather than flying the professor down to Penang or driving up in the North-South Highway to Penang, right? This professor could be actually teaching in a massive open online course, not just to the students in USM, but students all around Malaysia, if not Southeast Asia or all of Asia or the world, right? Which is actually quite an interesting idea, right? I'm quite sure you have come across a lot of MOOCs, maybe Chinese MOOCs, it could be Indian MOOCs, it could be American MOOCs run by top universities or universities who wants to be sharing their expertise in a particular area, right? And I think more and more countries have actually tried to make that massive open. Okay, you can still hear me, right? Because it seems like I was like locked out for a while. Okay.
Yes.
Thank you. I do not know why. Okay, wait, just hold on. You should be able to see this screen again. Cool. Right. Okay. Right. And they have ensured that to be able to achieve the equity, that this MOOCs should be available on the mobile as well. Right. So in the India since 2017, I think they have been like working on MOOCs that would be made available to the youth within the India, right? Run by top universities in India. MOOCs itself and learning at scale is not just confined to students. I think like increasingly in some of the projects that I'm like working in Uzbekistan, in Ghana, Honduras, as well as the Philippines, you see MOOCs being used to work with teachers as well for their professional learning. And MOOCs, in this case, it's not a MOOC, right? But it's still learning at scale because in the Philippines, whereby there are a lot of the islands, there are issues with infrastructure. So instead of using e-learning in terms of online learning, they are using a standalone multimedia course where the teachers learn independently, apply what they have learned in the classroom, and eventually get together in a learning community. I think like something that the center in UPM is doing as well, right? To share their practices and to share what they have learned in the open courseware, right? And that is being facilitated by a member from the district education office in the Philippines. In this particular project that I was involved in, it's really quite exciting, right? Because they are using this as a professional development program, right? For more than 300,000 early childhood and education teachers in the Philippines when there was a curriculum reform, right? So when there's a curriculum reform, you want to build the capacity of the teachers, right? And the thing is using such a learning at scale concept, right? They scale it up to more than 300,000 teachers in the Philippines. Next one would be big data and learning analytics, something that you have probably heard a lot about. I think the key thing is we need to really question ourselves. It's like we have got all this data, but what exactly are we trying to be using this data for, right? How could we be using it at an institutional level, program level, or even the course level, right? How do we track student learning engagement and student learning outcomes, right? So when we are using a learning management system, right, I think quite often the teachers do not get that much feedback, right, with respect to how students learn online, right? And this is what we hope to be able to achieve with the learning analytics, right? How all this data, right, could go back to the teachers in such a way that it will inform his or her own practices, his or her own courses, right? Or his or her program, right? And how does the institution present that data to the teachers in such a way that it is meaningful and it is usable, right? So it's actually quite a challenge because we know that we have got all this data, but how does the institution bring all this data together in a meaningful way that will be useful for the teachers to make changes to their courses, make changes to their programs, or make changes to their teaching and learning strategies or their assessment, right? I think if we look at way back 10 years ago, right, you see a lot of universities in the West experimenting like with the learning analytics, right? This is an example of how data of student retention, right? Or how the data of the student engagement, right, or student data could be used as a signal, right, to cause teachers, to program coordinators about which students to focus their attention on, right, through the traffic light signal of green, if everything's okay with that student, amber, right, that this is a borderline case, and red is something that is to be highlighted, right? And you could see that through the use of the course signal, which is a learning analytics application, right? You could see actually quite a significant student retention when course signal is used as compared to when no course signal is used, right? As what you could see on this pie chart. Much closer to home, again, a project that I was actually involved in the Philippines, the University of the Philippines Open University, right? Where quite a lot of the programs are just totally online, and how they use the learning analytics in such a way that they want to be able to identify students that need a support system, right, to improve upon their study skills, to improve upon their online learning skills, to improve on their digital literacy based on the data of the students, right, to be able to provide them with the necessary support to ensure that they are able to effectively complete the program itself, right? So again, we are like looking at big data and learning analytics, as in how are we able to provide better support for our students, right, to improve student learning engagement and outcomes, right? Next one, the artificial intelligence, something in the education sector, right? That we are not just looking at getting our students to engage in artificial intelligence, to be able to do artificial intelligence, right? But I think in the education sector is how do we use artificial intelligence in such a way that we are able to ensure more personalized learning, right? Because more personalized learning means we are able to better meet the learning needs of our students, right? So how do we use artificial intelligence to be able to personalize that learning process? How are we able to diagnose and how are we able to guide the learning pathways of our students, right? So these are just some examples of how artificial intelligence is built into some of the learning apps that we are seeing, or some of the learning management system that we are seeing. How are we able to use artificial intelligence to co-create the learning paths together with the students, right? Through a diagnostic system, and then to be able to point them to resources that is able to better support them in their learning and therefore better engagement. Right, the last one that I want to share with you is we talk a lot about games. All our students play games. Both my daughters play games, right? Genshin Impact, Roblox, and the whole works, right? Like how do we bring some of the gaming concepts into our courses and into our programs, right? What we need to be quite careful about is we do not want to compete with the commercial digital games, because that's just something that is impossible, right? They spend millions and billions of dollars to be able to do that, right? But how could we actually bring in gaming principles into our classroom, into our courses, in such a way that is able to engage our students in an intrinsic and extrinsic way, right? This is an example of a virtual workshop for mechanical engineering students. It's not a game per se, but there are gaming elements, right? Where you'll be presented tasks, where you'll be given points, where you are able to move up the different levels based on the tasks that you have completed. So quite a lot about drawing upon the gaming concepts, right? And of course, at times, especially in social sciences and the humanities, sometimes they draw on commercial games. They bring in a commercial game, right, into a particular program for students to engage. In this case, right, learning about history, right, going through a series of simulation and tasks in a game-like learning environment, right, to be able to complete this task, and therefore trying to link some of the classes that they have done in class, right, and to be able to apply the concepts that they have learned into the game and vice versa. Right, so these are the games, these are the innovations that we are looking at, right? And I think we need to keep in mind that as we bring in these innovations into the higher education sector, right, we need to be aware it's not about these innovations per se, right, but it is about how it is being used, right? I could see that in UPM, based on the various visits that I've been there is an ecosystem that is quite conducive, right, in ensuring that these innovations could be effectively used by teachers, right? That the teachers' capacity are slowly, gradually being built, right, to be able to use it in an effective way, right? So how are we able to ensure that we are able to keep the ecosystem conducive, right? Because we know that quite often the issues are about a lack of skill, right? You might see some promising practices in one or two individuals, in one or two departments in a faculty, but sometimes it's quite difficult to look at it across faculties. Again, the whole notion of access to internet connection, to hardware, to resources, etc. The motivation to want to engage in the innovations. Again, there is always that tension between research and development and teaching and learning, right? There should not be that tension, but sometimes there's always that staff appraisal system within our university, right, that might value one dimension over the other, right? So how could we create that motivation? How could we reward teachers for being excellent teachers, right? There's that lack of capacity of students. How could we create that capacity in our students to learn with technologies, right? To learn how to learn in an online environment. And how do we create a better institutional understanding actually among our students, among our education leaders, right? It's quite fortunate that in UPM, I think the senior management is pretty tuned in. And that was why the UNESCO IG, right, based in Shenzhen, have such a close collaboration with the UPM itself, right? Because we do see UPM as a center of excellence with that institutional understanding. And of course, to be able to provide better support to the faculty and to the individual teaching staff and eventually to the students as well, right? This is something that I have been working with UNESCO Asia Pac, right, to actually try to provide an institutional approach towards higher education, teaching and learning innovations, not just looking at the technologies per se, but how do we formulate policies? How do we provide learning support? How do we ensure that there's a clear vision and philosophy? How do we engage in evaluation? How do we conduct professional development? How do we build partnerships with industries and other universities to be able to do this, right? So if you're interested, you can get hold of this open access book that can be found in the UNESCO website about blended learning, right? You'll be able to see this particular tool that you are able to use within your faculty or within your university, right? So just to actually end my presentation, a key question for you to reflect rather than to discuss: is your university ready and capable to meet up with all these tech challenges, all these innovations that is able to address equity, equality, and efficiency? And what does it take for your university or your faculty or your department or your program, right, to be able to raise the game, right? So thank you very much. You can contact me in this email address, and thank you for listening.